Hi, sophisticated fantasy readers. Today's lesson is going to be a continuation of our last lesson where we looked at Professor Snape in Harry Potter, a clip of Harry Potter. And what we did was we watched the clip and we were looking for evidence. What we were really looking for is what motivation Professor Snape had to be the way he was. And when we look for that kind of evidence to try to figure out a character, it is called inferring, or you could also call it making an inference. Now, we did three important things when we watched that clip and we're making inferences. The first thing that we did was that we were looking at a very complex character. Professor Snape. The second thing we did was that we gathered evidence, whether it was taking notes on notebook paper or writing in a graphic organizer. And once we gathered the evidence, we thought about this. What was Professor Snape's motivation to be the way he is? Why do characters act the way they do? So in our last lesson, we made a chart to keep up with everything we're learning about reading fantasy. Let's review what it means to be a sophisticated reader of fantasy. The first thing we did was research the setting. What is the setting? And for us, it is a fantasy setting in The Thief of Always, and we talked about what a fantasy setting looks like. Then we asked ourselves, who has the power? What kind of power, and what is the evidence to show that that person has the power? Then we talked about how characters begin stories not knowing a whole lot, and they learn as they go, and sometimes we learn about the characters and what's happening in the story before the character even does. So we're learning alongside the main character. Then we talked about how problems can multiply. And it's very important that we use a graphic organizer or some kind of note-taking to keep track of multiple problems. And the last lesson and today's lesson is about suspending judgment about a character and places. So don't judge someone before you know all the information or before you've really looked at those character actions. So before we get started with our graphic organizer today, and you don't need a paper and pencil just yet, you'll need it for some work you're going to do later. I'll go ahead and pull this up. So this is the narrative reading learning progression. So I know fantasy is our genre, but fantasy is a part of a narrative. It's a story with characters, plots, problems, and solutions and endings. So it's also a narrative. So we're going to look at this one part of the learning progression. Now you'll see there's grade 4, 5, and 6. We're going to start in grade 5. And this section is inferring about characters and other story elements. Remember, inferring is when we're looking for evidence to help us figure out a character's motivation. So they're character traits. And I'm going to read this to you. It says, I can see places in a story where the characters are not what they seem at first. For example, the character might say or act as if he or she doesn't care, but readers see signs that he or she really does. That is, I see hidden sides to characters. And doesn't Professor Snape have that hidden side where he was in love with Harry Potter's mother and he cares about what happens to Harry Potter when we really thought that he did not like Harry Potter at all because he was so mean to him. So that is exactly what that's talking about, those two different sides. We call that contradictory. You're going to hear that word again just a little bit. I know that what drives the character, his or her motivation, can be complicated. There may be several things that drive or pressure a character, and often he or she is pulled in conflicting ways. That means the character doesn't know what to do. Now that's grade 5. I think we should look at grade 6 because you are so close to being in 6th grade. Grade 6. I continue to develop theories about main and minor characters, thinking how they are affected by other story elements such as the plot, setting, issues, and conflicts. So the only thing that's different here, you're still doing this, you're adding. What does the plot have to do with our main character? What about the setting? What about the conflicts? And then adding in some of those minor characters. So maybe those least named characters in whatever story you're reading. Okay, so I want you to keep that in mind as we are continuing to read any of the stories that we're reading. Now I'm going to show you. See, let's pull it up. Okay, so this will look familiar to you. This is what we worked on in our last lesson, and I thought it would be a great idea to show you using a familiar character in a book you've already read. So this is Weighing, Evaluating, and Ranking Evidence, and we are looking at the main character of A Night Divided. Her name is Gerda. So you will remember Gerda, and this graphic organizer should look familiar. We're going to look at character traits, details, and then we're going to rank that detail 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 in strength, 5 being the most important. And I am going to have you guys do this with something you are reading today. Okay, so one of the character traits that I thought about Gerda was that she was cunning. Now I need to find an example of this in the book. And one of the details that I found was this detail, and you might remember this. She tries to become friends with Anna again so that she can possibly go to her house to see where the wall ends on the other side. So if you'll remember, they were at school, and Gerda was trying to talk to Anna, and she seemed a little weird to Anna because they had not been friends for a while. So what she was doing was pretending like everything was just fine, so that she could possibly get invited to her house. So let me think about how important that was. And you may rank things differently. I ranked it a 2 because although it was a good idea, it didn't actually work. So I ranked that a 2. Another character trait is that there was a time when Gerda was defiant. Defiant is when you don't want to follow the rules or procedures. So one time when she was defiant was when she goes to the wall to see her dad, even though the Stasi officer held a gun to her face and told her to stop. She went anyway. So now let's think about what we want to rank that. Go ahead and think to yourself, how important do you think that was? Okay? I ranked it a 5. And I ranked it a 5 because she saw the message her dad was sending about digging a tunnel. If she hadn't gone to see her dad at the top of the wall, she would have never gotten that message. I did one more trait for you, and it is brave. And one time when Gerda was brave is when she went out after curfew to steal the pulley so that they could work faster in the tunnel. I ranked that a 5 as well. This will probably help them escape before someone catches them, because they are able to get the dirt out a whole lot faster with the pulley. Now, your job today is to take a book, The Thief of Always. Some people are still reading A Night Divided. I want you to make your own graphic organizer just like this, with a trait, detail, and 1 through 5 columns, and choose a character, or do more than one character, and do what we just did with Gerda. Okay. That was a great lesson. Remember, we're looking at these characters and inferring with why they do what they do and why they are the way they are. All right. Have a great day, everyone. I'll see you tomorrow.